Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Steve Tcherchian. I'm the Chief Product Officer and Chief Information Security Officer at XYPRO Technology. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to be going over proactive risk management strategies and how we can get visibility and real-time view of your security in your NonStop environment and beyond. Excuse me. As I mentioned, I'm Steve Tcherchian. I head up product and security at XYPRO. XYPRO's been in the cybersecurity space, primarily on the NonStop server, for over 35 years now. We're headquartered in Simi Valley, California. That's just north of Los Angeles. And we've got expertise in cybersecurity, compliance, mainly PCI, HIPAA, SOX, and other compliance frameworks. And we've recently added database management to our portfolio. We're a global company, and we've got global sales and support offices all over the world. We've got customers on almost every continent that we work with very, very closely. We've also got a very strong partnership with Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, HPE. As well as we've recently added database management to our portfolio by adding a company called Merlon Software out of Canada to our product suite. Interestingly enough, as well, we applied for and received a Inc. INC Magazine's, nominated for and received INC Magazine's one of the best places to work in 2017. So we've got a lot of energized staff and people here, and we're building some very, very cool products, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. So this is a great place to work, great culture, and where everybody seems to enjoy it very, very much. Me personally, I've been here for over 15 years. My background is primarily in cybersecurity for most of my career, originally as a developer, and then I've managed security operations centers globally. I've done it all. I've seen it all. I've experienced it all, from disaster recovery situations to forensic investigations for data breaches, to even writing code. And this has been my passion my entire career, and I love what I'm doing, and I love doing it here. So we'll talk about how that fits in to some of the items we're going to be discussing this afternoon. So XYPRO has some very strategic partnerships with some of the largest cybersecurity players around. Obviously, Hewlett-Packard Enterprise is our largest partner, but we also work with companies like Micro Focus and RSA Security. We've recently added integrations for SailPoint, who's the leader in identity and access management, and CyberArk, who does privilege access management in most enterprise environments, as well as adding relationships with Centrify and CA Technologies, and then there's a few others that are right around the curve, as well as recently setting up a relationship with one of the largest system integrators when it comes to the cybersecurity space with Optiv. So we've got some very neat stuff happening there with Optiv, some cool products rolling out, and some really, really interesting strategies around that. So jumping a little bit and describing what XYPRO does. Our products come shipped on the HP NonStop operating system as part of the operating system. So our merged audit product is a repository for data gathering and reporting. So what merged audit does is allow you to collect all of your security data, your audit data, your application data, your system data. It normalizes all these different sources of data and consolidates them into a single repository for alerting, reporting. It allows you to integrate this NonStop data, security data, and application data to an off-box security information and event manager like a Splunk or a QRadar, or you can feed it to any other BI tool or anywhere else where you want to do analytics or reporting on this type of data. This is a very critical component for a lot of compliance frameworks as well. PCI DSS requires your data to be stored in an untampered location. So this is one way to accomplish that. This comes with the operating system. It's part of the operating system. Nothing to pay for. You just turn it on and start using it. Similarly, we've also got XYGATE user authentication that comes with the operating system as well. This user authentication extends safeguards capabilities. So allows you to integrate your NonStop servers with your Active Directory environment or a single sign-on environment. It allows you to introduce multi-factor authentication for your NonStop sessions. So there's requirements in the latest version of the PCI DSS 3.2 requiring you to implement multi-factor authentication. For NonStop, you'll be able to accomplish that with XUA. Plus, introduces all kinds of extensible and granular controls that lay on top of Safeguard to give you a little more flexibility in how you want to manage your authentication mechanism for NonStop. We've also got XYGATE Access Control. This is your privilege access management for the NonStop. This will allow you to define roles and responsibilities and introduce keystroke logging, which is a very critical component to what we're going to be talking about later today. Keystroke logging will allow accountability of what commands your users are entering in their sessions on your system. So you'll have a full record of every keystroke that was issued on your system. And that becomes critical for analytics and being able to report and detect suspicious activity. Excuse me. We've also got XYGATE Compliance Pro. This is a visual user interface for reporting compliance status. You can see exactly how your systems are configured, how your applications are configured, and be able to remediate anything that doesn't seem like it's complying with where you need to be. From a database management side, we've got our SQL Express and Mars products. SQL Express will give you a visual interface for managing your SQL workloads, being able to identify and optimize queries, for example, and get for applications or workloads. So not only being able to detect where the query is maybe slowing down or impacting performance of your application or your processes, but also giving you the toolkit to be able to resolve those issues. And then Mars introduces intelligence and automation to your database reloads. This is like your database defragmentation, being able to reclaim some of the disk space that a database day-to-day activity takes up. Mars will allow you to configure database reloads in a way where they minimize the impact to system performance. Database reloads can be resource intensive. You don't necessarily want to do those during peak hours. So typically you'll schedule it for off hours or over a weekend or a holiday where you're going to have minimal system impact. But that takes time, that takes resources, that takes availability for somebody to be around to do that. With Mars, it's got the intelligence and the automation to simplify that entire process for you. I want to introduce a couple of new products that we've recently released over the last year. The first one is our XYGATE Identity Connector for SailPoint. As we discussed earlier, SailPoint is one of the largest identity and access management security vendors in the business. So we worked in conjunction with SailPoint to develop a NonStop to SailPoint integration. This is the first and only SailPoint certified solution for the NonStop. So if you have the need to integrate your SailPoint environment with your NonStop environment, this is the only solution for you. What this will do is it'll allow automatic provisioning and deprovisioning of identities on your NonStop. So typical SailPoint usage would be you'd hire somebody or onboard somebody, you'd add an identity in SailPoint, and then you would check off what systems or applications that identity would need access to. For example, Salesforce or Active Directory or Workday or any one of your other applications. The NonStop portion was always a manual process where you'd have to send an email to a systems administrator and they'd have to go in there and manually provision that identity. With this connector, you can now go into SailPoint and you'll have NonStop as an option. So similarly, how you would enable or provision Salesforce or Workday or any one of your other enterprise applications, you can now provision NonStop directly from that same workflow. More importantly, you'll be able to deprovision identities as well. So if you're offboarding an employee or identity, you would go into SailPoint, deprovision that identity, and it would automatically turn off access to the NonStop. Our other solution, recent solution, is Identity Connector for CyberArk. This is our CyberArk integration. Again, we worked very, very closely with CyberArk on this one, and this is the only certified and supported CyberArk to NonStop integration. What this integration will allow you to do is when your privilege access or your privileged credentials are vaulted inside of CyberArk, it'll allow automatic rotation of those credentials on the NonStop. Again, before this integration, that was a very manual process. You'd vault your credentials in CyberArk. As CyberArk would rotate those credentials, or it would need to be checked out and then be rotated after they're checked out. Then CyberArk would do its piece, but there was a disconnect because the NonStop wasn't aware that the password was rotated in the vault. With this connector, as soon as that password is rotated in the vault, the NonStop will have the new password, essentially locking out anybody who doesn't need access for any longer than they were authorized to. We're also working on some additional integrations with CyberArk and a few other integrations with other enterprise security vendors. So these two are the most recent ones. If there's additional need or if you've got other integrations that you'd like us to look at, please feel free to reach out, and we might already be working on it, or it's something we can explore. But we're happy to understand what your needs are in as far as integration goes, and willing to help you out. Okay, so jumping into the theme of the presentation. The current state of cybersecurity, it takes 197 days to identify a breach on average. That's over 6 months. It takes another 69 days to contain that breach, being able to control what they're doing and get them out of your system. So it takes over 6 months to detect that somebody's in your system, on your network, in your applications, doing whatever they want, whenever they want, however they want it, before they're even noticed that they're there. And another 2+ months before they're contained and kicked out. So we're talking about 8 months on average. And this is just an average. On the higher end, there's companies out there that have been breached for 3 years, 4 years, or longer before they realize that they've been hacked. The Marriott one just recently, they were hacked all the way back in 2014, 2015, and didn't realize it until late last year, or at least the information didn't start coming out till late last year. And even the nature of that attack and the impact of it is we're still getting news from that every week, that it's constantly changing. But they were breached for quite a while before they were able to detect that that was the case. Most of the companies that are in this picture, they have all of the data and the tools that they need to detect a breach. Yet they're not able to keep up with the volume, the variety, and the velocity that the data is coming in for them to make sense out of it, to know that this is what's happening on my systems, on my network. The data is all there. Most security compliance frameworks require you to collect all of this data. And with the adoption of data lakes and big data stores and data warehouses, all of that data is very easy to store and very cost effective to store. Yet it's difficult to make sense out of it. You don't know what you're supposed to be looking at, what you're not supposed to be looking at. It can be overwhelming, it can be time consuming, and in most cases takes you down a rabbit hole that might have might not have anything to do with what you're intending on finding out. Up until recently, 73% of data that was generated was essentially thrown away because we didn't know how to use it. We could store it, but there was no need to, because we were just targeting the specific events or the specific types of data that we were after to do our jobs. Yet we've got this whole volume of data that we were just discarding or throwing away because we didn't know how to best utilize it. This is where it becomes critical to understand what's in that data to identify, for example, a security breach. One of the key factors that contributes to a lot of companies being breached is security best practices not being followed. And I say this time and time again, it's passwords, it's credentials. It's either default passwords or insecure passwords or passwords that aren't rotated. But at the end of the day, it's if I'm hacking your system, I'm gonna go after passwords. It's like if a burglar if they can find the keys to your house under your doormat, they'd rather use that than try and sneak in through the chimney or break in through a window or some other more complicated method. If they can get the keys, the easiest way is to walk in through the front door. Hacking a system is no different. If they can get your credentials because they're either default or haven't been rotated or they're insecure, it's the easiest way into your system. Once they're in, they can move laterally, they can pivot around all they want because they're already inside. Passwords are the most critical security risk to any organization, especially default passwords and passwords to privileged accounts. Privileged accounts are usually have elevated access to perform admin functions. They can be administrator accounts, they can be service accounts, database connection accounts, application accounts, and other types of accounts. Most of these application and service accounts were set up years ago when the application or system was deployed. They're typically used for machine-to-machine communication or some other type of automated process. These passwords typically are not rotated. If they are, they're rotated very infrequently, but most of the time, nobody bothers to rotate them. The answer is, or why I hear that they're not rotated is we don't know what it's going to break. You've got some sort of machine-to-machine integration, you've got some sort of automated process, and if you change the password, you're not sure what process it's going to break, because in most cases, it was set up years ago, or you don't know who set it up, or you don't know how it was set up, so it's better left alone. If it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? The challenge becomes is these are the passwords, these are the types of passwords that are being targeted. Today's ecosystem where privileged account abuse is the most common way for hackers to compromise a system, being able to properly manage these passwords is paramount to risk mitigation. These manual methods become very resource intensive and error prone. For example, there was a report by a company called Varonis last year talking about 65% of companies have over 500 accounts where the password has never been rotated. Think about that. 500 accounts where the password has never been rotated. If I can get a password dump of all of these passwords because they're default or I know what they were 3 years ago, 4 years ago, I'm going to find most of these on a password dump site externally and free for anybody to pick up and start using. Simply put, this is a cyber criminal's best friend. So how are breaches occurring? For the most part, it's still malicious, either external actors or internal malicious insiders internally. We know who the hackers are, or we know what their intentions are. They want to get in, they want to lay low, they want to go after what their target is, and they want to get out of there before they're even noticed. 5-10 years ago, that wasn't the case. 5-10 years ago, if you're hacking a system or a network or a website or whatever your target is, you wanted that person to know that they've been breached, that they've been compromised. I've been part of way too many exercises where a system has been rootkitted and the attacker made it known that your system's been rootkitted. We're seeing a little bit of that with the ransomware type of attacks now as well. But for the most part, if I'm after stealing data or some other monetary gain, I'm going to lay low as much as possible and make sure I'm not detected, make sure my activity is hidden in innocuous user behavior. But the other interesting statistic here is the malicious insider. These are the folks that are actually working for your company. These are people that have been entrusted to do a certain job with a certain level of access. But they say everybody's got a price. The malicious insider can be as simple as, if I'm a system administrator, I know ethically I'm not supposed to be in certain areas of the system. For example, financial data or some other type of personal data is stored there, but my credentials and my entitlements allow me technically to get there. So I go in there and start looking at that type of data. I know what type of data I have access to now. LinkedIn is a very, very useful tool for all of us in the industry, as well as the attackers. LinkedIn is there for us to network with each other and communicate with each other. We'll list out our accomplishments and credentials and responsibilities, and even I've seen users list out what systems they work on at their company. attackers know all of this stuff is there. They'll go in there, they'll find your company, they'll find everybody that's working for your company, they'll find all their responsibilities and roles and create an entire profile of your company. And then target the users. Let's say we find somebody who's in maybe a little bit of financial trouble. Everybody's got a price. So if an attacker comes up to this person and says, you know, what can I offer you because I need access to this data? Will $10,000 do it? Would $20,000 do it? Would $100,000 do it? It might sound ridiculous, kind of describing it this way, but this is reality. This is what's happening. That's why that malicious insider statistic is so high, because this is happening. Malicious insiders are a real threat to a lot of companies, and they're very, very difficult to detect, because these are the users that you've hired within your company to do work that you've trusted them to do. Some of the common security misconceptions I hear as well. I speak to a lot of our customers. I'm often interacting with others in the cybersecurity business and kind of getting a feel for what's out there. And these are the things that kind of make the hairs in the back of my neck stand out when I hear of why security shouldn't be deployed or risk management shouldn't be taken more seriously. It's most of the time it's viewed as an IT problem, and it's no longer the case. Security shouldn't be left up to your IT guy or your IT team. This is a business risk, just like any other risk to your business, just like supply chain disruption or strike or a facility being unavailable or any type of business risk. Cybersecurity should be treated the same way. But when I hear only specific users have access to the system, so we don't need to worry about anything more than what we have right now, that's the wrong way to look at things. It's setting it and forgetting it is not security. It's risk management is a constant evolution. So what's a risk today might be a different risk tomorrow, might be a different risk the next day, and needs to constantly be evaluated. We have a firewall is another misconception I hear all the time, is our systems are protected because we have a firewall. We've seen with the increase in social engineering, especially malware and ransomware type attacks that are coming through email, that a firewall is almost meaningless at that point. If I can target a user via an email and get them to download some sort of malicious software on their system, I'm in, regardless of if you've got a firewall or not. Another one I hear all the time is we're PCI compliant, or we're NERPSIC compliant, or we're you name the framework compliant. Compliance does not equal security. Compliance is the bare minimum you need to be doing to protect your systems. Compliance is usually a set of rules or controls that were written based on lessons learned from the past. So because these things happened, let's create a rule set that say, don't do these things, okay? You don't do these things, you put the controls in place to prevent those things from happening, but how are you going to prevent new things that the compliance framework doesn't take into account? This is the separation between compliance and security. So anytime you hear we're compliant, that should raise a red flag. Going back to the first slide, or a few slides ago, where we were talking about the 197 days for mean time to detection of a breach, almost all of the companies that participated in that report were PCI compliant at the time. Another one I hear all the time is our systems are not connected to the internet. This one really makes me nervous, because as long as you've got a network cable connected to that system, it's in play. Doesn't matter if it's connected to the internet, doesn't matter how it's segmented, as long as there's a network cable there for somebody or something to access it remotely, whether it be for management or machine-to-machine communication or other purposes, it's in play. If you're giving somebody 6 months on your network to move laterally, to pivot around, to run all kinds of reconnaissance, you know, they're gonna eventually, ultimately find something that they can get into, regardless if it's on the internet or not, because they're already inside your front door. So a critical part of this exercise is identifying your assets. I hear all the time as I'm talking to customers and generally out there is, why would somebody attack me? What is what I have so important to them? I don't have anything. I'm just a pass-through. or I'm just a switch, or I'm just a some sort of proxy. I don't have any assets. I don't have any credit card numbers. I'm not storing any personal identifiable information. I have no medical health records. I don't have anything that somebody would want to target. But you're in business because you're doing business with either customers or you're doing business with other businesses. You don't want to necessarily be used as the launching pad for attacking somebody else, somebody you do business with, or your customers, or your vendors, or somebody else that you're interacting with. Here at XYPRO, we get we deal with a lot of Fortune 500 companies. It runs a gamut of the type of customers that that we help secure. We're often, especially recently, having to fill out a lot of questionnaires about our controls and processes and procedures and security on how we do things, because our customers and our vendors view us as an extension of themselves. These are the types of controls and requirements they place on their own business. If they're doing business with us, they expect the same type of diligence from our business, which then we have to require anybody else that we do business with to comply with these security controls. This is where it becomes important to identify what are the true assets that you have that you're trying to protect. Your asset might not be something that your business is holding, but it might be a connection or a relationship to somebody else that the attacker is after. You don't want to read in the headline, or you don't want to be the reason why your customer or your partner got breached. This is one of my favorite slides. This is Bruce Schneier, who's a very famous cryptographer, talking about there's no such thing as perfect security. And I think we've got to let that sink in. We can spend all the money we want in the world to secure our business, but we're never going to be bulletproof. We want to get to a point where we can quickly detect if something goes wrong to allow us to respond. That's the key. It's detection and response. The faster we can get to something, the quicker we can address it. Same thing as your car. You see the check engine light come on. You're not going to drive that car for another 50,000 miles before you take it to a mechanic, because that problem is going to get worse and worse and worse. You go to a doctor because you've got a cough. You're not going to wait 2 years, 3 years until it gets worse and other things start going wrong before you find out what's wrong. Security is the same way. We shouldn't be able to expect perfect security, but get it to a point where if I can quickly detect something's going wrong, I can quickly address the problem and block these people out. It's like he says here, no bank ever says our safe is good, so we don't need an alarm system. Or a museum says our doors and windows are locked, so we don't need a night watchman. It's detection and response. You've got these controls in place, but you've got to continue feeding into it and seeing what's happening so you can respond. Another one of these very good technologies that have gotten us to this point has been SIMS. It's Security Information Event Management Systems. These are your Splunks, these are your QRadars, Logarithm, Alien Vault. There's probably 50 others out there. They do a very, very good job of gathering all of the data, normalizing all of the data, and giving you visuals and reports and alerts on what that data means. The challenge that they have is they've got to be able to deal with a variety of different systems, data types, applications, all of this stuff. Their main purpose is to aggregate all of that data into a single location and be able to give you visual representation or reports on what that data means. The challenge becomes is when they start doing this, they're not going to be intimately familiar with every type of system that they're gathering data from. They're not going to be familiar with the applications, the users, the behaviors, the different variables that could come into play. They're not going to have the context of what a certain activity on a certain application or system means. So unless they're aware of it, it's going to end up being noise. They'll either throw that data away or they won't report on it. It'll be, and then the activity becomes you're trying to search for a needle in a haystack, and you might be going left when you need to be going right. So it's being able to introduce context into the SIM process is where SIM technology is going to become even more valuable going forward. But due to the lack of context right now, they're going to have a very false, they're going to have a very high false positive rate. They're going to be very noisy. you're going to get 400 alerts that somebody failed to log on within a minute. Which one are you going to pay attention to? Which one are you going to ignore? There's lack of standards that make it very difficult to analyze the data. They've got to support data types from all types of different vendors, from the biggest ones to every startup that has their own security solution or device or network device. They've got to be able to handle all of this data that's coming in at them and make sense out of it. So for the most part, SIMs end up relying on binary values. You know, did this happen or did this not happen? Or thresholds. You know, 3 failed logons within a minute. Okay, I'm going to send out an alert. But is that normal activity on my system, or is that something suspicious I need to pay attention to? This is where context comes into the picture. Another couple of articles I recently found from Gartner talking about the shift to threat detection and response, similar to the Bruce Schneier slide, talking about threat detection and response, is we've got to get to the point where we're managing risk in this fashion. We're not trying to have bulletproof security. We're not trying to set it and forget it and walk away. We're not going to say, this system's not connected to the internet, so I'm secure. It's actually being able to put the controls in place, harden the system, lock it down, and monitor it continuously, understand what your risks are, and identify threats very quickly. So how do we do that? We're going to, looking at this slide, we've got 2 different data sources here. On the left, we've got logs from a Linux server. On the right, we've got logs from a Windows server. On the left, we can see that a user is trying to log into an account called Mr. Hacker from an IP address called 222.65.44.22. On the right, we can see a successful authentication attempt, or an authentication from that IP address, from that same IP address. So we can infer that the event on the right and the event on the left have some sort of correlation between them, have some sort of relationship between them. They're related in some way because the same IP address appears in both data feeds. Okay, so now we've made a relationship there, and we've created new data from existing data, where previously we had 2 events. Now we've got 2 events plus a 3rd event that couples those 2 events together. Now what? Now how do we know that this is something that we need to pay attention to? How do we know that the event on the left has an important relationship to the one on the right? We know they're related. We can see the IP address in both data feeds, but how do we know that what we need to do with this one? So this is where context comes into play. Context will tell me, have I ever seen that IP address in my network before? Has that IP address ever tried to log on to Mr. Hacker before? Is that IP address on any blacklists? Has that IP address authenticated to any other system in my environment? I can see that it's authenticated to that Windows system, but is that an anomaly? Is that the first time that IP address has authenticated to that system? This is where it becomes critical, where correlation does its job very, very well to piece that data together, but we need that second layer of information called context to provide us actionable data. And actionable means we can respond quicker to threats that are evolving. So going back to what I was saying earlier, it's context is what's important. Context is the key. Context transforms data into information. We've got those 2 different data sources. That's data. Linking them together, that's just more data from existing data. Context based on those IP addresses, the users, the blacklist, the other dimensions we can introduce into that will transform that data into information and make it actionable to us. We might pull all this context in and realize that that's normal activity in my environment. Just because those 2 events were correlated doesn't mean anything special, because that's activity that is expected. I've seen that IP address before. That IP address has authenticated in my environment before. He has tried to log on to Mr. Hacker before, and Mr. Hacker is a valid account in my environment. Then I don't need to pay attention to that. But if all of those were the reverse, and I have never seen that IP address before, that IP address is on a blacklist, I don't have an account called Mr. Hacker, that IP address was actually successfully authenticated to my Windows server, that's an anomaly. I've got to pay attention to that one and ignore everything else. So what we did over the last few years is realize that there is a real need for this type of technology, that yes, the SIMs will do a very, very good job of correlating all of this data and representing it in all kinds of different ways, but there's still a lack of context to that data. We don't know what's actionable and what's not. We're searching for a needle in the haystack. It's taking up a lot of our resources, time, manually having to sift through these different silos of data and trying to make sense of what's related to what and what's important and what's not. It's just unsustainable at the velocity, the variety, and the volume that this data is coming in at. You know, it's they've said over the last 2 years, 90% of the world's data has been generated over the last 2 years, and then over the course of the next 2 years, we're going to see 99% of that data being generated. It's true. It's looking at what we talked about earlier. 73% of data gets thrown away because we don't know what to do with it. But now that we can store all this data because storage is cheap, now we've got to figure out what to do with it. So we worked with a lot of our customers. We worked with some security partners. We worked with HPE and others in the industry to come up with our newest product, XYGATE SecurityOne. XYGATE SecurityOne is our unified security dashboard for nonstop security management and risk management. It's a modular platform, which we'll describe in a minute, but its main intention is to reduce that mean time to detection. It's being able to take in all of this data, make sense out of it, to allow you to focus on what's important and ignore what's not. So you're not wasting resources chasing after alerts and incidents that might not mean anything, or it may be business as usual, but allowing you to focus your attention on what's important. We've essentially taken 35 years of nonstop security knowledge and put it inside of the box. The goal here is to give you actionable data right away. You look at the dashboard, everything's in a summary detail view. At the top level, you're going to see big numbers, good, bad, green, red. Draw your attention to what's important, what's actionable, what do you need to do next. Everything is clickable, so anything on the dashboard you can click in and get further and further down into the detail. If you're really a technical guy, you can use this to drill down to exactly where you need to be and get the forensic information that's required to do your job. But if you're at a higher level and just want to know the health of your systems, your applications, your security posture, your compliance, this dashboard is geared exactly for that. You'll pull it up and you can see everything right away in one screenshot. We wanted to make sure that security management on the nonstop is not a daunting task, that you can pick this up, anybody can pick this up, SecurityOne up, without nonstop security knowledge and be able to understand what's happening in their nonstop and their application environment. SecurityOne was architected as a modular platform. So we've got the web enablement platform or the browser enablement platform at the bottom, and then all the features are delivered as modules. So as your security journey evolves and matures, you can license additional modules. For example, we've got a file integrity module. We've got an Appliance Sentry Module, which will monitor the health of your NonStop CLIMS and your NonStop Security Console, and we're extending that to other appliances that are connected to the NonStop. This is functionality that's never existed before. So being able to get visibility in that sense is something that's been much desired for a very long time. And all of this is extensible by just turning on additional licenses for those modules and getting that functionality built in or brought in. One of the key ways that we're able to provide context and be able to detect anomalies is the data. The more data we can feed SecurityOne, the more intelligent it can be, the more it can understand what your patterns look like, what normal looks like in your environment, so we can identify the things that are happening that are not normal. So the more data we can feed it, the better results you're going to get. We do this via a tiered approach. The first tier, or the first way we go about it, is a rule and signature-based approach. What that means is we've taken all of our nonstop security knowledge and created rules that everybody gets out of the box. We've worked with our customers, we've worked with some early adopters of the product, we've gotten their feedback and created rules that would be applicable to just about every NonStop environment. So everybody gets that right out of the box. As a second level to that, you can take those baseline rules and customize them to fit your environment. So for example, there might be some rules that might apply to a financial services industry, but not apply to a retail industry. You can turn off rules, turn on rules as you see fit for your business. You can also customize the baseline rules to tailor them to your specific needs. For example, if you need to target certain users or IP addresses or groups, you've got the ability to do that. And then our third tier is machine learning algorithms. So being able to take this data, all of this data in, profile your system over a certain amount of time and understand what's normal for your system. That way we can identify the things that are anomaly, the patterns that are anomalies. Being able to identify unknown unknowns very, very quickly. So we're not just relying on rules or binary alerts or thresholds. We're enhancing this to continue to learn, continue to understand, and continue to feed you relevant information. One of our most popular modules with SecurityOne is our File and System Integrity Monitor module. This is an enhancement or an intelligent file and system integrity module, where traditional FIMs, as it's known in the industry, FIM, what they work on is they'll detect when something has changed. You've got file A looked like this yesterday, looks like this today. And then you've got to figure out who did it, what was changed, and all these different other investigation procedures that are going to require a lot of manual effort. What we've done with SecurityOne is enhance that and taken that to the next level. So you've got a very, very intelligent file integrity module. What that means is you're going to get real or near real-time visibility into things happening on your system as they happen. So we'll be able to detect if a file was added, if a file was deleted, if a user changed a configuration setting, if a user added another user, if they opened up a port on your system. We'll be able to see all of that in near real time. We'll be able to tell you who, what, when, where, why. One of the most critical aspects to this being intelligent is being able to tell you who did something, rather than relying on you to go through and manually piece together data from different data sources. We'll tell you right away who did it. Everything again in this view is summary detail, so I can right-click and drill down to any one of these alerts that get generated. I can also right-click on any one of these rows and go to the history lifecycle of that object. That means I can see every time a file was modified. I can see every time a file was read. I can see every time a system configuration setting was changed, for example, or attributes were changed for a user. I can see all of that in one view. This becomes very, very important if an auditor wants to see a history of an object, or for configuration management, if you want to see who's changing system configurations on your system and when they were changed. What was the previous value? What's the new value? Did a change put my system at risk? Did it violate any policy frameworks that I've got? You'll see all of that in one screen. Another one of our modules that's picking up a lot of momentum lately is our Appliance Sentry Module. This is one of our newest modules that allows you to monitor your CLIMS, your NonStop console, and other appliances that are connected to your NonStop environment. When I say CLIMS, if you're not familiar with that terminology, on the NonStop, disk I/O and network I/O are offloaded to these external servers that are connected to the NonStop maintenance LAN or the NonStop backplane. But they're external environments that people are getting wiser to, want to know visibility, want to see visibility into, want to know how they're secured, how they're compliant, what traffic is going through them. So we worked very, very closely with HPE to develop this Appliance Sentry Module that'll evaluate the configuration of your CLIMS, of your console, based on the CISSP framework, which is a very industry standard security compliance framework, and tell you give you a risk score of how you're secured, or what you need to address. We'll highlight the most critical areas to address. We'll tell you what it does, what risk it introduces to your system, and we'll even give you the remediation activity to fix that problem. So we'll tell you this rule, for example, is set up this way. It needs to be set up that way. Because it's set up this way, it puts your system at risk. It gives you a risk score, and it tells you run this command to fix this problem. So you'll get all of that. We're not just telling you something's wrong. We're telling you something's wrong, and we're giving you the tools on how to fix it. Another module that we're actively working on right now is our compliance module. This will give you a real-time view of the compliance health of your systems, your environment, and your application. So we'll tell you if you're complying or if you're out of compliance with any of the PCI DSS requirements, for example. In this screenshot, we're looking at requirements 1 through 12 for PCI DSS, and we can see requirement 8 is flagged for investigation. It's got a big red circle on it with an X. So we would click on requirement 8, we would see all the sub-requirements, and then we can see which one is affecting or which one is failing and what we need to do to address it. We can also print out a compliance report from here and hand that to an auditor. If you're familiar with some of the other PCI compliance reporting tools like Qualys or those types of tools, it's going to be a very similar and very familiar report for your auditors to take in and include in their assessments. Another view of the Appliance Sentry Module. This is showing us it monitoring the Windows environment. So we can see in this screenshot that, for example, our antivirus is out of date and our Windows firewall is disabled and out of date. We can see that Windows updates haven't been installed in about a year. I can click on that and I can see which updates are missing, because they're missing, which vulnerabilities I'm exposed to. I can get all of that so I can prioritize in a priority order so I know which ones I need to tackle first, so I'm not completely overwhelmed and nothing gets done. The score on the left where I see high risk, that's an aggregation of our evaluation based on the types of risks we were able to detect and assign it a risk score. So some of these things that we detect will have lower weight because they're not as severe as some of the higher ones, so that affects your overall risk score as well. Okay, another screenshot of the Appliance Sentry Module. This is showing our CLIM status. So we can see, for example, we can see the top risk items. We can see the types of rules that are failing. And I can click on any one of those rules and I can see what the actual remediation activity is going to be for that one to fix that problem. This is a screenshot of our intelligence and analytics module. This is the real meat of the product. This is the pattern detection and machine learning part of it, where we can detect malicious activity based on patterns we're able to recognize because of the context we have for NonStop. So I can see from this screen at the highest level how often these incidents are occurring. When they're occurring, I can click on any one of these incidents and get further detail of which events contributed to these incidents being triggered. I can also see different visual representations of these anomalies. So I can, for example, go down the left-hand side and check multiple incidents and overlay them on top of each other, which will show up in the graph above. That'll tell me visually if these incidents are occurring at the same time. For example, they're happening at 2 a.m. on a Saturday night when I know nobody's there, and then the rest of the week I see a flat line. I know that somebody's in my system doing activities when I should expect no activity, and I can see multiple types of that malicious behavior happening all at the same time. We're also able to modify the rules that come out of the box using our Incident Rule Manager. This is a very visual rule and pattern editor. Allows you, if you're familiar with things like Visio and Lucid Charts, where you can click and drag different elements and make different patterns. We've modeled it very, very similarly, where you can click and drag different types of events. And give them attributes to be able to modify them or customize them to your environment. So we try to abstract all of the NonStop specific knowledge you need to configure rules like this, and just give you a very rich user interface to manage security on the NonStop. We want to make managing security on the NonStop very, very easy and very familiar to others that manage security on other systems. That way you don't need specific NonStop resources to hire and train and manage a very specific tool. We want to make the NonStop fit into the rest of the enterprise seamlessly. So at the end of the day, the goal for SecurityOne is to reduce the mean time to detection. We want to make sure that we're giving you actionable data and you know where your focus needs to be to address risks. If we're able to detect things very, very quickly, it allows you to respond even quicker and really control your costs and damage that can come from a breach. We do that via real-time intelligence and analytics. We're monitoring the system at every layer, from the network all the way down to the volume level. So we've got visibility into all those different stacks, and we're gathering data and correlating data and contextualizing data from all those different stacks. This is ultimately to improve your response time. Context is the key here. We've got the NonStop context. We're able to provide meaning to the data, to the patterns, to get you to understand what it is you need to focus on, so you don't feel overwhelmed or having to dump a bunch of manual effort into this process. Okay, and that takes us to the end of the presentation. I do want to highlight a couple of upcoming events that are here in the near future for NonStop. We've got ATUG coming up, which is our Atlanta Tandem Users Group, coming up next Wednesday. I will be attending that event, as well as Jeff Kyle, who's the General Manager of HP Mission Critical Systems. He'll be keynoting at that event. That's in Atlanta, Georgia, next Wednesday. 2 weeks from now, CTUG will be happening. That's the Canadian Tandem Users Group in Toronto, Ontario. And then, as it happens every year, NonStop Technical Boot Camp at the start of November. This will be in Burlingame, California again, at the San Francisco airport. So, in summary, why is context necessary? We need context to improve our decision-making ability. Without context, we're having to infer all kinds of different data and would be prone to making incorrect decisions that would take our resources away from what we need to focus on. That all has relationship to operational costs and efficiencies and proper usage of your resources, of your human capital. This will also help you avoid the costs associated with a breach. If you can get to a problem sooner, you're going to control those costs. And increase visibility and awareness of the security infrastructure of your NonStop. With SecurityOne, we're giving you the tools that have never existed before, that are giving you visibility and understanding of environments that might have been unfamiliar to you for the longest time. These are the things that keep folks up at night. You know, now that you've got visibility into what's happening, you know what to address. You get to a green state, you stay at a green state, and you know that you've got XYPRO covering your back. And with that said, thank you everybody for joining the presentation. I'm happy to take questions if there's any questions now. Otherwise, feel free to reach out to me via Twitter, LinkedIn, email, however you feel like it. I'm happy to discuss this type of stuff. I love discussing this type of stuff, or any other security topics that you'd like. So thank you, everybody.